Thanks for watching live or listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. Once again, we are back. And we are here to discuss tonight whether teacher accountability has gone too far. Let me try and, in a nutshell, give a little introduction to this particular concept and show. If you recall, and some of you will, maybe about 20% of you, back in the 1970s and 80s when teachers used to get apples on their tables at the end of lessons. Now, my father, who retired in 2007, 8 maybe, he wasn't observed as a teacher basically for about 25 years. So nobody ever came to watch him. His entire accountability was self-driven and I guess student-driven by the way things went in the class. The only time I guess some teachers would ever be observed in that era is if something was going drastically wrong in the classroom, i.e., chairs being thrown or, something along those lines, right? And even then, observations and learning walks probably wouldn't be happening in the same way they would be today. It might be a stern telling off from the principal, right? We've moved from that to a place, I guess, over the last 20 years where some would say, not everybody, but some would say we've gone to another extreme where teachers are overly monitored, where there's too much accountability, where, teachers are held to account for too much, and there's more and more stuff being added all the time, right? There are others who would say this has improved standards, and this has made things better for children and children's lives and the outcomes in schools. There's my incredibly amazing overview of accountability in schools. And of course, there are lots of levers of accountability in schools, which we're going to discuss tonight, like lesson observations, learning walks, book clucks, work scrutiny, data, pupil progress meetings. I haven't even written these down. I'm just reeling them off like a bad memory, like a nightmare that I'm reliving. But, all these things, and we could add more and more and more and more, right? There's lots of them. But how many of those are necessary? How many of those are helpful? How many of those are actually, helping teachers? What are the motivations or the reasons or the aims of those things? Now, to help me discuss all of this, I've got an incredible 3-guest panel here. I've got Simon Powell, who's a secondary science teacher. Hello, Simon.
Hi.
Good evening. We've got Peter Cole, who's a deputy head teacher, I think secondary again. Hi, Peter.
That's right. Hi, Tom. Hi, everyone.
And we've got Professor Becky Allen, who is co-founder of Teacher Tap and also an academic. Hello, Becky.
Hello.
Amazing. Well, listen, I think what better place to start? I pulled up, and this was only maybe yesterday, that I saw a few tweets, right, from teachers talking about accountability, because it happens all the time, right? On different LinkedIn, X, all the other social networks. It won't take you long to see somebody talking about this. The first one I saw was from a maths teacher called Rufus, who said, "It strikes me that schools often construct alternate realities, most often in lesson observations, where teachers are often told they're doing the wrong thing by people who have no idea what they're talking about." We also have a tweet here from the secret head teacher. "Things a one-off lesson observation won't teach you. How well someone can teach, how well the children are learning, the long-term impact of a teacher, the relationships they've built, their understanding of sequencing, things it will teach you, how well someone can perform. By the way, we're going to discuss these in a bit. And the last one is by somebody I know personally quite well. He said, seriously, I would rather have my entire teaching career live streamed for whomever to watch than a ton of learning walks and mini lesson observations with actions taken off the back of them. Continual high-stakes activity isn't healthy for teachers, even if framed as support. Now, I could also show you, tweets and things from teachers who are actually quite positive about things. Not positive, but saying that these things have driven up standards, right? So let's start then. Simon, secondary science teacher. What are your thoughts on this idea of lesson observations and learning walks? Do you think that they help you as a teacher or hinder you as a teacher?
I think they do both. So I trained as a teacher during COVID. I was the first sweep of the ECTs, after qualification. So that was very interesting. I think in any professional walk of life, if you are going to get feedback, and I think it's a very delicate relationship that you have with people if that feedback is going to be useful for you. If these walks and observations are to give you feedback, absolutely that feedback has to be couched in a way that and framed in a way that is to help you as a teacher. And there are so many dimensions of what teaching means currently. Unless you speak to the teacher and know what help they're looking for, I think it's really easy for these things to be tick box exercises that are just doing that, ticking boxes, not necessarily helping the teachers that they're aimed at. And they're sort of taking the pulse of a large, complex organization, but that's a 10-minute pulse for something which is working on multiple layers over a long period of time and is incredibly complex. So I think they are good. I've had some useful feedback from these things. I'm kind of used to them because that's the teaching environment I've come into. It gets a bit tricky when I'm handed some feedback which I might not be ready for, I don't want, doesn't help me, and actually makes my workload go up, which I don't have time to squeeze in extras. And yet you have to.
Let's separate for a minute lesson observations and learning walks. Okay. So let's say, Peter, you're a deputy head. Do you still do one-off lesson observations?
Yes, we do. We do a couple a year for kind of all members of staff are entitled to 2 lesson visits, 25 minutes or so, which are framed around their professional development. So linked to appraisal, but it's a question of getting some more subject-specific feedback. We try to put those within curriculum areas, have curriculum leaders lead those, very much sort of focusing on subject-specific pedagogy, subject knowledge, and those sort of specialist areas. And they're distinct from our learning walks, which we're doing on a much more regular basis, dips in to see what's going on in lessons and provide people with kind of quick, kind of positive bits of feedback. It's always framed in that kind of way, or reflections which just say, really like the way you did this. I was in a Year 9 dance lesson, for example, this morning, and it's just very much about the dynamics of a group and the way in which the teacher was modeling. I've no specialism in dance to sort of say, the way in which you were managing that motif was, absolutely perfect, or this is the way I would do it. So, Rufus's comment about being told the wrong things by the wrong people, I totally get. We're not all specialists in areas, and I think our learning walks would just be designed as school leaders to be saying, you're doing some great things, and thank you for doing those, and maybe this, maybe that. Have you thought about this kind of way of doing things, or I was interested in that particular approach. Why'd you do that, etc. So the two are separated, but a lot less emphasis on, when going back a few years, I remember very much it was like 3 observations a year. They're real big, high stakes events. And I think we've moved away from that. So even with those 25-minute visits, it's much more kind of in people's day-to-day experience that there will be people coming in and out of classrooms, and those doors are reasonably open, and people expect it, I think, and are used to it.
How are they? So you mentioned it was linked to appraisal. How are they linked to appraisal? How is that done?
So that's just within the appraisal policy of the school. It would say that there'll be a couple of lesson visits within the year, and they'd be just linked to teaching and learning objectives and kind of part of your professional development. So very much kind of negotiated with teachers and with leaders, with the curriculum leader, etc., saying, this would be a good area for you to come and look at. And it's really, it's light touch in terms of the appraisal. It's really about the professional development of getting that subject specialist feedback. If things are going wrong, then they're picked up within other mechanisms. But the overall approach of both the lesson visits and learning walks is to find out what's going well, celebrate that, and
is it genuinely though?
Well, this is massively massively the intention. So I suppose the idea was that often people welcome people, leaders being visible, not being shut away in offices. We really wanted to be inside classrooms, and I suppose our learning walk process really developed from that the fact that as leaders we were trying to be out and about and coming into classrooms and see what was going on. So we try to then link that together with quick feedback. So it is, as I say, it's always, in terms of a learning walk, very much about what did I really like in this lesson, what are my reflections on that, any other comments, and my only comment on any other comments is always thanks very much for that. We have a few kind of areas within there. It really isn't a tick box, but there are certain things that we might be working on in school. So one for us at the moment, for example, is making really good use of time, a kind of little strategy we've got called work the clock. And if we see that within a lesson, we'll say, we saw that was good practice, but it is in no way a tick list where we're going in and saying we need to see these 10 things in a lesson, and if you don't get 5 of them or 6 of them, then there's a problem. It's very much recognizing that is going to be a snapshot. You see what you see, but almost always you see something which you can say, that was interesting, well done, thank you. And from there as well, we learn what people are doing well in school, and we use that to inform our professional development and our CPD, and staff can share that. And I think, one other point about it, as well as leaders doing them, it's very much a system of all staff being involved. So we delegate an hour of inset time each year to people doing learning walks, and say, for an hour, try and get out and go and see people in other departments and see what's going on, and make somebody's day by giving them some positive feedback about what they're doing and saying thank you to them for what's going on in the classroom.
Before I bring Becky in, just briefly, but this is to Simon and Peter again. So, Simon, as a secondary science teacher, how many times in the academic year just gone do you estimate? And this could be, you could do this on a weekly basis if you want, but how many times do you think you were observed either in a formal observation or in a learning walk? How many times did somebody come into your classroom for a period of time to watch you teach?
Well, that's interesting. So I'm in a new school as of the start of this year, and there's a lot of low stakes learning walks and just literally 5-minute flybys, which I don't have any problem with. I quite like. I would kind of want to just throw up a question to Peter about saying, as a leadership team, how often are you asking the teachers that you're observing what it is they want in terms of the support, and they want you to be observing, and they want you to see. My sense in schools is a lot of this accountability is very top down. It's something dreamed up. It's sometimes I'm going to use that expression to be controversial, dreamed up in an SLT meeting, and we're going to do this. Let's just make the teachers do this. And rather than bottom up, what do you need that's going to help you in your roles? What's going to help your pace in lessons? What's going to help you manage the behavior in your classes? What are the things that are interfering with that? My sense in schools, it just gets very top down, and it can be frustrating. So I might be going a bit in an inset day. It's like, I've got all this for you, blah 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 blah, and it's like, but that's not what I need. That's not what I want. That's not what I need.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I suppose one answer to that is around our strategic plan, which has got a number of elements around teaching, learning, curriculum within it, as you'd expect. That's been driven increasingly by middle leaders. Being involved in saying what they feel the kind of the needs are in areas. So I talked about pace and working the clock, for example, before. We're very interested in challenge and stretching students, cold core questioning, and these things have come increasingly in conversation. But middle leaders have driven that hugely and talked with their departments about it. And the feedback that we get from teachers of things we've done in the last few years are that things, for example, such as cold core questioning, have been really instrumental in practice, and that's something that people have welcomed, that they feel has made a real difference to practice. People, I suppose, requiring and saying, yeah, more help with what you mean about adaptive teaching, what you mean by modelling, have also really fed CPD. So that the whole thing is quite a cycle. I imagine that really with the walks, it's kind of very much about as being out in the building and you see what you see. So sometimes that isn't necessarily right. Well, people have said really need some feedback on questioning, for example. Go out and see it. It's more, what's actually happening in classrooms at that time. But then we, feed that back into CPD and response from that of CPD led by our staff for our staff, talking about what they enjoy doing, what's working well for them, what we've seen going really well in lessons, and sharing that has been a far more positive model than senior leaders or external people coming in and saying, right, I'm going to profess that I'm the expert on this, and this is what you need to be doing. And I think the learning walks do really help you get that sense of what's important to people in classrooms, and what kind of needs there are on the ground, and what success there is on the ground as well to share.
I just want to bring Becky in based on everything we've said so far. Becky, do you have any thoughts on lesson observations and learning works, or do you want to pick up on anything that Peter or Simon were just saying?
Well, as always, my thoughts are like half what teachers on Teacher Tap say and half research thoughts. To start with the teachers on Teacher Tap, I mean, it's worth saying, by the way, that when you take the teachers who are not early career teachers and they're not senior leaders, about almost 1 in 5 of them say the observation process at their school is absolutely non-existent. So there are still schools where this kind of stuff just isn't going on, and I think we should acknowledge that. Of the others, about half of teachers say that they think that lesson observations are helping them and improving their practice in some kind of way. And the other half say they aren't. But in a way, when you ask them what happens during a learning lesson observation, it might help you understand why so many people say they aren't. Because in so many cases, the kind of feedback they get, they don't really consider to be feedback that's intended to improve their process, their way that they teach. It's just kind of observations that are made about what happens to be going on in the classroom. And it's quite rare, actually, for teachers to say that they feel that they're getting judgments made when an observation is taking place. When I say rare, I mean less than half of teachers are saying that this is what's going on during lesson observations.
Is that rare, though? Less than half? Because that could still be like 40%.
Yeah, okay, so 40%. 40% excluding the 20% who aren't having the lesson observations at all, right?
Right.
But it's still it's not quite what you think it is. And graded observations are now pretty rare. And even back in when we started Teacher Tap in 2017, they were quite common still. But now it's something like 8 to 9% of our teachers say that they're having graded lesson observations. Now then, there is some research on lesson observations. And in fact, there was a randomized control trial that took place, and it was a large EF-funded one that took place in Britain about lesson observations. And the trial showed, first of all, that being observed and being given feedback didn't improve teacher effectiveness as measured by student test scores, teacher value added in this study. It also showed that being the one who got to go around observing other people and give them feedback did improve your effectiveness as a teacher. And that's interesting, isn't it? Because we all know who gets out of the classroom to go and do lesson observations, right? It's experienced teachers, teachers who are no longer teaching much themselves. So they're actually getting all this incredible CPD of the opportunity to go out and visit other classrooms. Meanwhile, the people on the full timetables don't get to do lesson observations, when they are probably the ones who would really benefit from them much more than having some senior leadership visit their class and give them feedback on their own teaching. Yeah.
No, it's really interesting.
I just chip in there as well. Sorry, if I may, and that's the power of behaviour in terms of it as a teaching mechanism, or as a method. You used to see this in leadership in some of the companies that I work with. If they are behaving in a way that is not congruent with the messages they're telling people, people will follow what they see. Look at mobile phones. Everybody has a mobile phone because back in the 90s, the leaders were the ones who were successful, and they showed that off by having a phone. So it's very difficult for people not to have phones when they followed that behavior that they've seen all around them. So I think we underestimate the power of behavior as a training mechanism and as a development mechanism. And then you've just, I think, nailed it there with what you summarized.
Yeah, I think really interesting points, I think, about the difference between observation to really help people improve, and maybe the sort of just observation of what's happening. I think the need to provide feedback to improve does require a different model really to learning walks, because learning walks you're dipping in, and we will ask in ours, for example, reflective questions. But you don't necessarily have that opportunity then to sit down to talk through what's been going on. I think that's one of the big differences with our lesson visits, is the feedback and the discussion which then takes place afterwards. So I get that, but I totally get is why we would we encourage people as far as possible to get out into classrooms. That's just a brilliant way to learn. And you're absolutely right, Becky, the privilege of seeing great teachers just doing what they do is absolutely outstanding, and it's a reason to really encourage people to do that.
Peter, I just wanted to pick up though on the bit that Becky was saying about it not improving the teacher teaching, right? So another really good blog that I read ages ago, actually, by Professor Rob Coe, where he looked specifically at observations. And one of the bits in this blog, now I think this was from a study they did, Strong, in 2011, did a study on lesson observations. And in this, I love this study because it's just like, it's mad. Like you listen to the stats in it and you're just like, what the hell? Okay, so they found that in the observation, the proportion correctly identified by experienced teachers and head teachers was below the 50% that would be expected by pure chance. At this level of accuracy, fewer than 1% of those judged to be inadequate are genuinely inadequate. Of those rated outstanding. Now, this was in the old 2011 era, but that's still, let's be honest though, there is still evaluative judgment, whether it's said to the teacher or not. This is my opinion. When someone's doing a learning walk, a lot of the people doing them are making evaluations and judgments in their own heads, whether they're disclosing them to the teacher or not. They are. And those judgments will be along those lines of maybe not the old Ofsted framework, but in terms of, excellent, good, it was okay, it wasn't very good, right? And this one is saying that at that level of accuracy, fewer than 1% of those judged to be inadequate were genuinely adequate. Of those rated outstanding, only 4% actually produce outstanding learning gains. 63% of judgments will be wrong. And I think there was another stat in this, but I don't know if it was that Strong report that it was in, but it was something like, if someone's observed the first time, and then the same teacher's observed by a different teacher the second time, something like a 75% chance the grading would be different the next time. So the point I'm making here, and the point that Rob Coe makes, is that observation produces a strong emotional response, right? And it also in my opinion, it also, I hate to say it, but any teacher, in a school in themselves, in an observation setting, it's sometimes difficult to sort of park the ego a little bit and go, you know what? I might not be that good anymore. I might have been good 5-10 years ago. I might not have been. Who knows? You know, I'm basing, you know, and of course we can base our own feedback on what we are as a teacher on lots of different things, and that's fine. But I think when you're going into another classroom, it can be quite difficult. So I don't know what you think of all of that, but my central point was, if the feedback isn't either right or improving the teacher, then what's the point in doing it?
So, I mean, I think the first point about that study in the 2011 era, I mean, thank goodness we have, I think, largely moved away from graded observations, because I think the level of stakes within those, and I remember being kind of in a system and in a school where it was absolutely expected that as a senior leader, if you were worth your mettle, that's exactly what you were doing. You were going and grading, and the stakes were really, you know, really high in terms of if you got sort of inadequates or requires improvements, that led into kind of more support, more training, more observations. And you know, and I shudder to think really about that system, but equally people just wanted the outstanding, they wanted the good. I don't think it was very developmental at all. So people's egos were huge in terms of wanting to deliver a brilliant lesson, but also being very closed, I suppose, to being reflective and saying, I'm struggling a bit with this. So I think getting rid of that, you know, has been a major step forward in getting people to talk more openly, because that grading isn't there. And you start then talking about, well, these are the things which seemed really strong. I was interested in this bit. I'm not so sure about that bit. Why did you do that? And it becomes more of a coaching conversation. So I think that has helped kind of make things far more developmental. I suppose within a learning walk, if you're not getting to that level of detail, I suppose it's a more holistic thing that as a school, as an organization, you get to understand where there are some real strengths in the school, and where there are areas that you can share which will help people. And if you get people going around and doing those walks as well, they develop. So I think it's in that you get the improvement. But Tom, after I responded to your tweet about kind of live streaming of lessons, etc., and said, look, I think learning walks can be a really positive thing in a culture.
I did. By the way, I was not by that tweet suggesting that everybody should start live streaming. This was just a personal preference thing of me preferring to be live streamed for my entire career than experience any learning walks or lessons.
Yeah. No, I get that. The point that I made, though, then I watched one of your shows, and you were on with Tony, and you were just talking about motivation and, you know, what keeps people in a profession. You're just saying the power of thanks, and when do you get to say thanks? And one of the things that I think a regular learning walk culture can bring about is that opportunity for leaders to be seen and in and out of classrooms, and students see them and say thanks to the students, thanks to the teaching assistants, and thanks to the teacher, and just have a regular presence. And I think it can have that function really, as well as, you know, necessarily developing in one learning.
I guess it depends, you know, ultimately it depends who is doing it, the culture. Now, a teacher spoke to me a few weeks ago. They'd had a learning walk which lasted for 15 minutes, and it had the feedback off the back of it had completely destroyed their confidence, to the point where they were like, they literally their mental health had plummeted. You know, they were really they'd lost their confidence. Their confidence was just shot. Right now, you could look at that in one sense and say, well, you know, that's on the teacher to see things more holistically and see the whole pattern of events and, you know, go back to their experience. But should it be on the teacher? The flip side of that is it worth risking that? Is it worth, you know, sort of, if we're not going to see a tangible improvement from that conversation, then is it worth that risk? Simon, I wanted, because you didn't answer the question about how many times somebody came into your class. We got diverted off. hold that thought while I mention our sponsors. Just want to say a massive shout out to Hachette Learning, who are one of our sponsors tonight. So thank you, Hachette Learning, for supporting all Teachers Talk Radio shows. Check out their amazing books and resources on the Hachette Learning website. Make sure you go there. Check out the books, formerly John Catt. And also our great sponsors this evening are the Bet Show. So if you're interested in education technology, the biggest education technology event in the world is the Bet Show in January 2026. It's free for teachers to attend. 23rd of January to the 26th of January in central London. Get over there at the Excel Centre. It's a fantastic event. Teachers Talk Radio will be there on stand. So, yeah, say hi too. Right, Simon, how many times, right, come on, I hope you've done your arithmetic. How many times did you get seen in a lesson observational learning walk in the last academic year? Do you estimate?
Joe, I did. I can't put a number on it. What I did notice was, having recently come out of teacher training, that it dropped right down. And actually last year there were a lot fewer, and they were literally flybys, everything checking in okay. Yeah. And that was from a very supportive sort of science team, where, you know, some of the more challenging classes I was having, if they could pop in and there was another adult in the room, that was extremely supportive. So I think I probably noticed them less because they're so different from the more formal. You've got one of these coming up, there's somebody sitting in your room the whole lesson, and it will be graded and it will go towards your passing your ECT. So I think it felt very different, and I would tend to just focus on what I'm doing in the lesson and pay them little attention. But it does change the atmosphere and what you're doing.
Yeah, feel free, anybody, to come in on this, but I think, like, for me, obviously still teaching now, if somebody comes in the room for less than 2 minutes, okay, that's different to me if somebody comes in the room for, say, 10, 15 or 20 minutes, right? Yeah. If it's a 2 minute one, if I go into a classroom for 2 minutes, you can still get a sense of what's happening in the classroom. Anybody could, right? An ECT going in there for 2 minutes could get a sense. They couldn't work out anything about the quality of the teaching, but they could probably get a sense of, are things okay in this classroom right now, right? Are things okay or not, right? So for me, I don't feel any pressure from somebody coming in for 2 minutes, whatever, to sort of more or less, you know, from a behavior point of view, from a school culture point of view, coming in and going, we're going to go into as many classrooms as we can for 2 or 3 minutes and just check everything's okay. I don't have any, like, I think that's a positive thing. That's great, because I'm going, yeah, there's somebody keeping an eye on behavior. Where for me, I might feel a little bit of, and again, I'd feel less pressure now because I'm nearly 20 years in, but maybe 15 years ago, if I was in a culture where people could come in at any time for 15 or 20 minutes and there was any sort of evaluative or judgment sort of basis to it, I think that would stress me the hell out, if I'm honest with you. I think that really would have made me nervous. I think I'd be not dreading it, but each day I'd be going, oh, is the roulette wheel going to fall on me today? You know, am I going to be the one in the spotlight again? And obviously, depending on the frequency, you know, I mean, I remember when they moved away from the 3 observations a year, they then moved into a sort of hybrid to maybe what we've got now, where it was like a learning walk week or a learning walk fortnight, where you'd have like all these like sort of mini scrutinies over like time.
I just to jump in, Tom, I actually feel sometimes if someone's only been in for 2 minutes or 5 minutes, I feel a little bit robbed. I'd like them to have seen more of what I'm doing, so you know they can see me.
Is that an ego thing, though? Like, I don't mean that in a person, but is that, like, for me, I'm like, what can that? It depends how accurate that feedback's going to be and how well they know you, doesn't it?
Yeah. If they're going to observe me teaching in science, you know, you can't just deliver too much valuable information in a 5-minute segment. You know, there's lots of information you can, but then it needs to go revisited. It needs to be, you know, put into a context, and then it needs to be tested. So you can't often do that in 5 minutes. So if someone's only been in for 5 minutes, I'm not going to value what feedback I get necessarily.
But
from
I
them.
wouldn't be wanting feedback from that. That's me saying I don't mind someone coming into the room and just standing there from a behavior culture point of view for a few minutes. What I'm saying is when there's any sort of, what you're suggesting is a 5-minute learning walk with an evaluation and a sort of monitoring judgment feedback with it. And I'm saying I agree with you. If that's what you're going to do and it's only 5 minutes, then do it for 15 or 20 minutes. But I'm suggesting that too much of that for any amount of time would put, if I've got too high a frequency on that, I'm wondering whether that's putting a lot of pressure on people. And it only takes one incorrect bit of feedback, one thing that they get significantly wrong with what they've seen, and they feed that back to that teacher. I'm saying the risk of doing that far supersedes any improvement in what that is going to deliver to a teacher. That's my point of view, by the way.
I think this was what triggered what I was. Sorry, Peter.
Sorry, no, it's okay.
As the overarching sort of subject today is accountability, I think that, you know, as a still fairly new teacher, the amount of things I have to keep track of, and then somebody popping in with a learning work or a little bit of this and some feedback when I'm the vast majority of my energy is just going on tracking and planning and keeping it all together so it doesn't fall apart. I can see very easily how somebody could get that little piece of feedback, which probably in context when you step back and look at it, is nothing too important. But given how much we have on our shoulders as classroom teachers most of the time, I think it's very easy to tip people over into that wrong space.
I think the crucial word that you used, Tom, and that's been used here is very much about culture, isn't it? And it's got to be, I suppose, understood within a broader context of the culture of a school. And you know, to hear that somebody had been in there for us, 15-20 minutes wouldn't be a learning walk. It goes beyond it. I get that you're sort of saying, you know, if judgments are being made, then there needs to be a bit more time. I suppose what I'd come back round to as well is, I think 5-10 minutes, you can learn something about what's going on in a lesson. You can see what's going well in there. You might be able to raise a few questions. And I think that the culture then has to be, you know, if you are, I think if we're ever sort of developing any sort of concern around anything, that it's then you talk with the curriculum leader and say, you know, look, what do you think about this? What do you think about that development? And the support can then be put into place. But ultimately, you know, our system wouldn't work if people were getting feedback which destroyed them. You know, it just wouldn't happen. It would have collapsed by now. So.
But how would you know that it didn't?
I'm sure, because people they're
not going to turn around to you and say it.
No, I think. Well, I can. You know, I think it could happen. I think it would. I think that would happen. Actually, I think people would express if they felt that they'd been, if something had been misjudged. If you were putting onto a learning walk form, so it comes to you as an email. Basically, we fill in a Microsoft form. It goes to colleagues. I think if there was feedback there, and it's designed so that there wouldn't be, but if somebody was saying this was all wrong, you got this wrong, I think people would come back and say, I don't think you understand, and you know, that's left me feeling pretty poor actually. So it wouldn't be the format to do it in. It's not that isn't appropriate.
Becky, any thoughts?
Well, I think in all of this,
see your cogs going.
Yeah, it's probably worth us acknowledging some facts that I think the evidence shows are true about teacher quality, which make the process of lesson observation so difficult. One is there is a large variance in teacher quality, and I think it's unambiguously true that there is such a thing as teachers who are consistently effective at their trade and those who are less effective. We know teachers do get somewhat better over their careers, especially in the first few years, but it's striking how little the growth in teacher improvement is relative to the variance in quality. So to be clear, there are teachers who are there as novice teachers in years 1, 2, 3, who are more effective teachers at that point in time than the person who walks in the door, who's a deputy head, who thinks by the virtue of their seniority that they are going to be able to give them good advice. And they're already more effective as teachers. Now, we can all have arguments about like how on earth can that be true as a profession, but that is what the data says is true about teachers. And that's what's so complex, isn't it? That we don't empower expert teachers to go into the classroom and observe other teachers, and we don't empower observation of expert teachers to take place, because within the system we operate on a seniority basis, not an expertise basis. Now the question is, do we all know who the good teachers are? Actually, yes, we do. And the studies show that. The studies show that whilst people like head teachers, when they're asked, their views on teachers in a way are only modestly correlated with the teacher value added. What they do show is head teachers know who the best teachers in the school are. They know the extremes, and they know who the worst teachers in the school are. But we never exploit that within our system. We never have a public way of just acknowledging there are just a set of teachers in the system who are great teachers, and everybody in the schooling system knows who they are in their school. Really, really exceptional teachers, but they're not the ones who are doing the lesson observations, and they're not the ones that we all get to visit. And so this is where the dysfunction of the system lies. It's a seniority system where senior people who may or may not be okay at teaching get to go around observing other people teaching who are often more effective than them in the classroom. And we sort of assume that these management people know what they're talking about, even though they themselves may not be a very good teacher. That's what's kind of weird about it all, isn't it? When I think about it. Tom,
that's quite challenging.
You're dropping too many bombs. It's just in one statement.
I don't have any answers though. I mean, it's just weird.
The problem is though, right? I mean, if I look at myself as a teacher, I said to you, I'm nearly into year 20. I, in some ways, was I a better teacher 10 years ago than I am now? In some ways, yeah, probably. In other ways, probably I'm a little better now, probably than but so maybe it's balanced off. But like some of that comes down to energy and application. Being honest, you know, some of it
also
comes
focus.
down.
People take on management responsibilities, and you know, you often meet teachers who say, since even becoming a head of department, you may think, well, they still focus on their subject, that's fine, but actually they just say they know their teaching's worse now they're head of department because they're worrying about a load of other things. So when we observe on the teacher development curves all that flattening off, and you can argue when it starts, but about 7 years in, nobody's getting better at teaching anymore. Like, as you say, it's energy. It's that people can't work out how to get better at teaching. People don't want to get better at teaching. People have had a family and frankly just trying to hold their lives together. Or people have got interested in leadership and management and they care about being a better manager. But that's got, you know, it's not helping the kids in the classroom who
also,
get taught
like,
by them.
You don't necessarily get lazy, but you get into a routine of what works for you, of what you know works for you. Now, that might not be the best version of what you ever did, but it's one where you go, right, I've got this extra amount of effort here, which I could do, or I've got being comfortable in my job and in my position here for another year or two and not burning out. Which one am I going to pick? And maybe in my 20s, I 100% would have picked the other one, right? Whereas
what we say about teaching is that the complexity of being in the classroom means that you must develop habits. Otherwise, you're just like those weird probationary teachers who kind of everything's very jolted and like difficult, and dealing with any situation is very difficult. So you develop habits in order to become a fluent teacher, but the very act of developing the habits impedes you from actually being able to get better at teaching. And that's why you get trapped into this kind of leveling off of your effectiveness, where in order to improve, you actually have to break the model, and you temporarily have to make yourself worse. And it all has to be very painful in order to change. But the problem is you're only going to do that if you're really sure that the change that's being proposed is like a worthwhile change. And as we know, like, we don't really know a great deal unambiguously about what should teachers be doing that's different to what they're doing, because the answer is, like, often it's complicated and it depends and the research doesn't tell us. So SLT come along with their, like, you know, whole school must do this thing. Like, even if the teachers could break their habits and learn how to do that thing, like, would the thing make them teach better? Like, some of them maybe, and for some people, no, it might actually make them worse. But you know,
we've talked about energy a few times here, and, you know, as a biologist, I know all systems have got their energy and they've got energy limits. And so in corporate training, we would talk about, you know, when you're learning something, you start off being unconsciously incompetent, then you move into conscious incompetence, and then conscious competence. And this is the slow thinking fibers that we're trying to teach with kids in school. And what you've just been saying, Becky, for teachers who've been in there a while, they've got loads of habits or subconsciously competent things that they do, that to then pick those apart, they have to slow down. They have to pull that apart. They have to invest energy in something that they have developed shortcuts or habits for, because that saves their life when there's so much raining down in terms of accountability. So, you know, as someone who I feel very much I'm in the conscious incompetent or conscious competent zone, it's incredibly draining. The things I have to juggle and try and follow and be accountable for, I get overwhelmed really easily. So yeah, change is difficult. It's one of the things makes change anywhere difficult, is slowing down and pulling apart what you think you know. What is it that makes you, when someone is also, you know, unconsciously competent at something, do they necessarily know what it is that makes them good at that? Are they necessarily able to teach somebody else how to do that, when a lot of that has gone into a place in their head where they just do it?
I think just to give one example, though, that I referred to before about a habit that I think has been broken. It was certainly a habit of mine that was broken. I think many of my colleagues was that one about questioning, and just a simple thing like, don't wait for hands up, ask a question and then nominate a name based around research, based on Doug Lemov and others, and going into that way has really changed, and I thought it improved the effectiveness of my teaching and other teachers that learned particular habits in school. And then I suppose, just to tie it back to the learning walk thing, the way in which we kind of get the information about where that's going really well and what can be shared comes from that intelligence that you get by looking around and getting into classrooms a lot and seeing who's doing those things really, really well. So recent Inset Day we had, there were all kinds of people, all levels of experience, presenting things that they did. So, you know, everywhere from ECTs or, you know, sort of, you know, upwards into people that had quite a period of time in the classroom. And I think that's a hugely powerful story to be telling people and showing that you can learn new habits and you can learn from people who are just on the beginning of that path as well. They can do really, really effective things.
Well, it's interesting what Becky, which I completely agree with, about sort of the effective teachers in a school being the effective teachers in a school, and not actually being to do with really anything else other than who the best teachers are, right? But also, and this again is just me personally, whenever anybody comes to observe or learning or comes into the classroom on a learning walk, there's not many times that I can honestly say that something about my practice won't change or tweak because somebody else is in the room. No, it might be just something purely subconscious, right? Could be, but for example, if somebody comes in the room and I know they're going to be in for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it might be, am I going to go off on the tangent? Or am I going to bring the humor in with the children that I would normally bring in at a particular point in the lesson? Is there a natural moment where it goes, oh, there's a little anecdote I'd normally tell here? Or is there a little story I'd normally tell here? Or is there a little interaction that I want to have where I'm going, oh, I better not do that. I've got to do a do now task. It's the first 5 or 10 minutes. I've got to do a retrieval quiz. If I don't do this retrieval quiz right now, because it's the first 15 minutes, they're going to walk away and go, he started the lesson without a quiz. So we're going to send him a form now to say, you're not sticking to what the best practice is, which is the do now retrieval quiz. And I'm going, well, Not that I don't care, but I'm going.
Is
I've
it
got
like
this.
time, or is best practice getting people engaged and ready to learn and building a connection?
Well, this is where the common sense comes in from you, Peter,
Mm.
because there'll be other people where it's not like that. There will be other people in schools where they're going, he's not doing the do now. He's not doing the retrieval to start the lesson. He's not got a branded PowerPoint slide on the thing at the start of the lesson. He hasn't done this and that. And then
it's back to culture, isn't it? You know,
it is a culture.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying though, it's all that thing I said about risk though, because if you're let's say you're an experienced teacher, right? And again, anybody feel free to come in on this, but you're an experienced teacher. Let's say you're 20 years in, right? The teacher's been in the school for a little period of time. Let's say they've been there for a couple of years, right? You've established the fact they're not, the children are doing okay in the class. You don't know the degree, but you know that they're solid, right? Could they improve? Yeah. Can everybody improve? Yeah. But there's an experienced teacher there, and you're going, well, I could just leave that teacher alone, not because it's part of our policy or whatever, but I could just go, you know what, the risk of me overburdening that teacher and then sort of me giving them some feedback they don't like, or them feeling burnt out, or them feeling over pressure, that risk factor of doing that versus our policy. I'm going, do you know what, with those guys, I'm just going to leave them alone. Yeah. I'm just going to let them get on with it.
A common sense culture would say that could be done, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Peter, you mentioned coaching conversations earlier on, which I was a big fan of in previous lifestyles, but not seen very much of it at all in teaching. Becky, is there any research and statistics on coaching conversations?
Coaching is a major kind of fad that's going on at the moment. It's all over the place. I mean, it's become like the absolute favored like CPD. So I'm surprised it's not happening at your school. And there is research that shows that out of all types of CPD, that coaching is the most effective. And that coaching programs can see reasonably decent improvements in teacher effectiveness. By decent, I mean very, very small, but everything's very, very small when it comes to teacher research. You can think about like, why is coaching effective and all other CPD is like really hard to find any effect of. And in part it's because nearly all CPD just isn't very high dosage. So like, just doing the odd workshop here and there on inset day, like it's not likely to it's hard to prove anything, but coaching's kind of unique that like it's quite intensive. But not only that, it's kind of structured in such a way that provided you're doing one of the programs that's consistent with the research, that there is some hope that you actually manage to change your practice. Whereas with most CPD, you don't change your practice, and that's why you don't get better. There's pretty positive evidence on coaching.
With coaching, I mean, again, I've had a bit of I've done a bit of coaching, but not a lot, and I've been coached a bit, but not a lot. With the coaching thing, you mentioned there, Becky, like, I don't know whether I'm picking up the wrong thing there of you saying it. I know it's on trend. I know completely, it's everywhere. It's everywhere, right? What have you noticed anything has anybody noticed anything in terms of, like everything has its lethal mutation? Like everything has its version of itself that is just ridiculously pathetic. Okay. So what is the coaching version of the lethal mutation? Anybody?
I want to chip in here. Sorry, Becky.
Go on, Simon.
I spent years coaching in industry, the CEOs, managers, all sorts. And I spent years sports coaching. And the thing that boils my proverbials is the expression instructional coaching, because those are two extraordinarily oxymoronic processes. To stick them in the same thing, that I don't get that. And I think coaching has a different definition wherever you look. So I just would be interested to see what we all might think coaching is.
Well, I think they use the word instructional as in basically coaching of pedagogy. So they don't mean it's an instruction, they mean it's a coaching of pedagogy.
Yeah.
And usually effective coaching is based around a rubric or a framework, so that the observer and the observee have to at some point pick something from a framework, which is the thing that is going to be the point of observation, the thing the person is attempting to improve. And you might say, well, our framework's restrictive. Like, yes, they are. But then on the other hand, we've got all of these observers who aren't trained really in observing. They're just jobbing teachers. And so you sort of need some sort of structure around the whole process. But at least the coaching is set up in the idea that two grown-ups agree on a thing that the teacher is going to try and like change in some kind of way. And so in that's what makes it like have the possibility of actually working, unlike nearly all other CPD, where there is no clarity about like what it's for, about what anyone's going to improve. No one's trying to do anything. They just sort of, you know, absorb it and say, that was very nice, off I go, you know, back to my classroom to get on with doing my teaching.
And in my background of coaching, the onus is on the person being coached to find their own ways of improving. So they're investing from up front to say, I think better would look like this in me. These are my barriers. This is what I want to work on. I don't know where I could find help on that. So the person who needs to improve is the person defining their pathway forwards, or where the gaps are that they're going to fill in. And I haven't seen any of that in teaching at all.
Oh yeah, that happens.
Does happen.
See it at some point.
It does happen. It's coming, Simon. Don't worry. Don't worry. It's coming. But no, I mean, I don't see that as a negative. I mean, I see that as a relatively positive thing. I mean, one of the things that I sort of was thinking as well is, as a teacher, once you get past, you know, the first 5 years or whatever, you know, I just find that teachers are their own biggest critics, and most teachers, if they manage to take ego out of it, they sort of know what level they're at based on their actual level they started at. It's like, right, am I better? Am I worse? Where am I on the scale of, you know, and they know what the teacher standards are. They know, they've seen probably about 100 different rubrics of teaching and learning over the years of what, you know, what good teaching and learning is. So most of them deep down inside, they might not say it, but they probably already know like where they're at. And then it becomes like a sort of a not an ego thing, but it becomes a thing where it's difficult if somebody comes in for a period of time, even a full lesson, and says, I don't like what I've seen. It's like, well, if you know where you're at, then, you know, I think there's a great deal of personal pride in teaching. And sometimes that's good because it keeps people going. But sometimes it can be negative in the sense that, like nowadays, if somebody said, I don't like what I've seen, if what they've said is true, okay, as a teacher nowadays, I'd be like, yeah, wasn't the best. See you later. I wouldn't dwell on it, and it wouldn't like destroy me and my sort of state of mind. And I'd probably be like, yeah, well, it wasn't the best. Now, obviously, if it was tied to performance management, right, that's where it could become a little bit more worrying, yeah, because it's your livelihood, it's your salary, it's all those things. But if it's learning walk feedback ain't gone well, okay, yeah, it wasn't the best, see you later. But as a newer teacher, of course, I'd have seen all that's any sort of negative feedback, whether valid or invalid, it you know, it really, I look for it, you know, and I really took it on board. Now, did it improve me? It kept me on my toes. I don't know if it, you know, I don't know. Anyway, there's just some random thoughts.
Back to the sort of accountability topic, because I think a lot of the feedback and things that we're expected to do as teachers, it seems to grow and grow and grow and grow. And all of that, because the energy of managing that, then it requires more and more energy. So then the energy for change and improvement, you know, you have to prioritize where you're going to invest your energy to get that return on investment. And I think that is, you know, I see that getting harder and harder. And we talked about behavior a little bit earlier on, that managing behavior is taking more and more energy, and reporting and data collection, all of these things. There's only so much energy to go around. Where does that stop? At what point? I see some of the older teachers who've kind of in line with what you just said, Tom, they know what to let go, or they've come to a compromise with certain requirements from SLT or reporting, etc., and they're more comfortable with that, so they can manage their energy better.
There's a place of peace that you probably reach where you say, I'm just not going to do that. Right now, that sounds really bad, but it's like, I'm just not going to do it. Right. Or I'm going to buy into it. But you know what? I'm going to make sure I'm doing these things because I've done 20 years and I know these things from, 15 different schools are the things that work and the things that I need to do well. But this other thing here, which is going to sort of destroy my work-life balance or negatively influence how I feel, or I'm just going to park that. And I'm going to have the confidence to park it. I think the problem that you run into there, of course, is you then run the risk of, well, how do you deal with me, Peter, in that situation?
Being performance managed.
Do you fire me?
I just think again, it's the common sense, isn't it? And schools will work in different ways, but workload management is has been a huge agenda, hasn't it? I think in actual fact, some of the requirements, for example, data collection. I think most schools are collecting less data than they did. Reporting, we found smarter ways to do that. Are
they, Becky, collecting less data? Yeah.
I mean, somewhat less. I mean, we have tracked it, haven't we, on Teacher Tab, and it's fallen. I mean, you've still got like a third of teachers required to do at least half-termly data drops. Okay, so at least 6 times a year. So that's not great. But it is less than the point when a lot of schools were doing.
I think there was a point, wasn't there, where that was virtually, what you're expected to do. That was good practice. We haven't touched on Ofsted, but Ofsted used to, I think, probably, kind of drive that. And then I think Ofsted more recently have actually directly raised the question and said, if data is being collected that often, then but ask the question, why? How's it used? How does that help students?
But part of the problem is that the MATs, when you get a large MAT, then they appoint a data lead, and then the data lead needs something to do because they're not a teacher. Then they start demanding all this endless data to come in.
I love you.
It just reinvents itself, the data wave, in new ways. Like, it's been fascinating to see the rise of the MAT data lead.
Do you know what, though? I actually think that's again, I'm throwing controversial things in here, right? SLT teams have got bigger and bigger, right?
They have over
the years. They've got bigger and bigger, right?
Bigger. Yeah.
Now, what that means is if I'm appointed into an SLT role, right, and the whatever anyone says, I want to be seen to be doing something in my new role, right? Whether that be new policies, whether that be more stuff. Now, if I'm going to do more stuff off my own back and it's only going to impact me, great, right? But if I'm introducing a whole raft of new things to try and make an impression with the deputy head, Peter, right, and be like, the new kid on the block, that's where it's sort of going, oh my goodness, So
one of the interesting things that's already happened in primary schools, because primary schools' pupil numbers have been falling for a couple of years now, and they've got no money at all as a result. And so they are down to having like no teachers who are sitting around in offices anymore. Like, everybody has a class except for the head teacher. So you don't have any of these deputies that don't teach, or deputies that just have like, a little bit of teaching. And we're going to see the same happen in secondary schools. From now on, it's going to happen, because secondary schools have got the demographic collapse is about to start hitting them in a kind of way that like is nothing they've ever seen before. And how do you cut costs in a secondary school? Well, in primary schools, at least we were able to shut primary schools. And in every part of the country, we were just taking out massive amounts of capacity from the system. We can't shut secondary schools because they're too big. So secondary schools will have to shrink. how do you shrink a secondary school? It's quite ugly. And the quickest number one thing you have to do first is you have to get your teacher ratios of teaching hours up. So you have to pull out your assistant heads. You have to get your assistant heads back into the classroom, or if they leave, not replace them. So all of this kind of busyness around having initiatives that take place. I mean, like, for example, just a school having a teaching and learning policy. Do you think that any school, when I went to school, had a teaching and learning policy? Well, no, of course it didn't, because it only had one head teacher and two deputy heads. I went to one of the largest secondary schools in the country, you know, so nobody was writing a teaching and learning policy. There were no initiatives around anything happening because there was nobody to do any initiatives, because like everyone was just in the classroom teaching. So it would be so fascinating to watch what happens as secondary schools deal with massive, massive budget deficits.
The one thing that's interesting there is the counter devil's advocate to what you've just said there, Becky, because there might be some who'd look and go, well, we want to do that anyway. We want to trim our teams down anyway. I mean, in other countries like Spain, France, other countries, they don't have big, you know, 7 assistant head teachers. They have head teacher, maybe a deputy, but that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah.
So
but they
possible,
also don't have local management of schools. So typically the municipality will run the schools, the municipality will employ everybody, the municipality will be determining the curriculum and everything else. So one of the things that's happened for such a long time now is that from local management of schools onwards, actually schools have a lot of responsibilities in our country, and that's why we have a bit more management. But you're right that nobody has this thing called an assistant head. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. It's something that we created at some point in the 1990s. It was pre the Labour government, but it was a 1990s.
There were senior teachers, weren't there? You had a senior teacher who did things, and it sort of developed from there, really. I think you're right.
I mean, there's some who were saying, well, there's no way you could do without assistant heads because of all the safeguarding stuff that schools have got now and all the sort of SEM provision, all DSL, you know, all the work around that.
Right. Yeah. So that's been a major change, has been inclusion, which, you know, because we used to have special schools for kids with low to moderate special needs, which are not in the system anymore. So, yeah.
Yeah,
I think again back to this accountability umbrella is that the width of knowledge just on that topic, what we're expected to know in a classroom now, is much broader than just knowing our topic and knowing our pedagogy. There's all this background information. You know, I definitely feel that if I was a specialist child psychologist, I could do my teaching better. But that's a big demand on my learning and my time and my own cognitive load. Another set of stuff I have to juggle, which makes the job harder.
Yeah. There's also, just sticking on our accountability theme, because we've only got about 7 minutes or so left. Sort of the big thing on disadvantaged pupils, pupil premium. You know, teacher messaged me a few weeks ago, and their school had gone back to color-coded seating plans, and letting disadvantaged students answer questions first, marking their books first, giving them feedback first, sort of all that stuff. And I've experienced that in my career, thankfully a long time ago now. But I, you know, it's something that might be sort of still floating around. There's a big emphasis on, still that massive emphasis on the gap between pupil premium and not non-PP versus PP and all that stuff, right? So where do we sit on that? Anybody got any views on accountability when it comes to disadvantaged students?
Well, I obviously have a lot of views and have written extensively as a critic of the current approach. But let me say something new about like why I think it all happens. I think it happens in part because policymakers and policy lobbyists, people working in think tanks, obviously they care about poverty, but they also kind of understand what poverty is, and they think it's something that they can say something about. And so I think that's why they use it as a policy direction. But ultimately, like if you are a teacher in the classroom, what matters is low attainment. Like what matters is students who don't know your subject and are struggling to learn it. And that's like the social gradient that we operate on in education. There are the students who are learning really well, and there are students who are not. And that's not the same thing as the children who happen to come from poor households, who may or may not come from households who are highly motivated to help their children learn, who are reading at home with them. They may be very high attainers, they may be all kinds of things, but they uniquely don't have a common set of educational needs. And so as a narrative, it's like deeply unhelpful for schools to focus on this group, because they are a group of children who are not the same as each other in terms of their educational needs. But we're sort of asked to do it. And then therefore we're asked to do the impossible. And what happens when we're asked to do the impossible is we keep reinventing stupid things, like putting stickers on the books that are different colours, and asking certain kids to answer questions first, or sit in certain places in the class based on something that doesn't have anything to do with how effectively they're going to learn the subject. And so I think that's why you just see this invention and reinvention. You know, nobody wants the social gap to be there. But just because the social gap is there, it doesn't mean it's like the instrument by which like schools can have a productive narrative about what's wrong in our schooling system. And I think it just allows other like stories to not happen. Like there's a set of kids who arrive at secondary school having got, you know, like 20% or 30% in their maths sat. So they haven't mastered the maths curriculum at primary school. And then they enter secondary school, and we know very little about their backstory of their educational needs and how they got to the point where they couldn't do any maths. And then they sit in these classrooms and they continue to not do any maths and not really get better at maths. And like it's like an absolute national crisis. And yet we all spend our time worrying about like the pupil premium, which is also like a crisis, but it's not an educational crisis that we can fix. But we could have a big national conversation about fixing bottom set maths. Like we could do it, but we don't, do we? Because like it's for some reason something that policymakers don't like to talk about. And I think it's because they can't talk about it, because then it becomes something that's like an educational specialism, and they don't really know about education, do they? They're just like, you know, making pronouncements about education. So, you know, the whole thing's just weirdly dysfunctional.
I think that seems to mirror what's happening with a lot of SEND pupils as well, that the real SEND pupils with the real need are being diluted in terms of resources that can help them, because everybody wants an exception card for this or for that, and there seems to be a lot more grey area. So, you know, in a short space of time I've been teaching, there seem to be more and more SEND acknowledged students in a class, which doesn't seem to make sense. And then the ones who really, really need the support, that are really obvious, are not able to get so much.
Yeah.
I think just maybe a slight counter view on it is I think increasingly popular the view and the understanding that great teaching is going to benefit the least advantaged pupils and students. So I think, Becky, maybe that idea about bottom set maths, literacy, kind of vocabulary instruction, all of these things have taken currency, and a lot of schools' pupil premium strategies would focus on those more than, for example, you know, color coded seating, etc. I would say, but it's within, I suppose, again, within school strategies, but schools are very much encouraged to use, for example, EF toolkits, and they will always point to high quality literacy, numeracy.
They will now. They didn't for a long time.
No, absolutely.
People like me pointing out we had to stop doing all these completely mad things and start focusing on low attainment. And what makes me angry about the idea that within the EF strategy, like a legitimate way to deal with poverty, pupil premium, is to focus on low attainment, is it kind of presupposes this idea that if we've got wealthy kids in our school who are also low attaining, like they're somehow less important or not part of the strategy. And to me, like the point of like the school at its heart is that we help children learn, particularly children who are not being given, you know, the basic skills that they need to be able to function and have a productive and enjoyable life. And like, I don't care if they're rich or poor. If there's kids in the school who can't do maths, like I want them to all have the same entitlement to interventions. I don't want the rich kids who are struggling with maths to be denied interventions because they're not part of the pupil premium strategy.
It's very sad to think that what you just described is children coming into school with a certain lack of confidence in an area like maths. I mean, I think we see it in science as well, that they just don't make any progress over 5 years in secondary school GCSEs.
And they're far more likely in maths to get non-specialist teachers, to get inexperienced teachers. We know that from Teacher Tap because we can ask on Teacher Tap, what are you teaching this year? Which groups are you teaching? So bottom set, key stage 3 maths classes are more likely to be taught by the least experienced teachers, because the schools always prioritise, and we know this as well, their year 11 maths allocation before everything else. And so you just get whatever's left. And with a maths teaching crisis, you know, that's what you end up with.
Also, again, the other thing that links in with the whole accountability thing is how if you mentioned it, Becky, and I've mentioned this before when I had Alan Francis on, who's the social mobility commissioner, and we were talking about, I was basically saying to him that, there are many families who are classed as disadvantaged where they have an incredible educational environment around them, where their chances of success from the age of 11 through to 16 is like 100% more than the next family on. Now, if you were to pack a school with those families, okay, that would then mean potentially that your progress 8 could be incredible. Because if I was just sitting here going, I'm just going to game this system, then I most don't. But let's say I was a sort of a Machiavellian about it all. I could sit here and go, right, I'm gonna attract or get families into the school who I know have this amazing view of education, engagement with education, work ethic, sort of the whole thing of how important it is that you come through from the age of 11. I'm gonna pack the school with those kids from those families, but they're all classed as pupil premium. They're all classed as disadvantaged based on poverty metrics. But I'm also going to look at it and go, what's the chances, looking at this student here in year 5 or year 6, that they can make insane progress to year 11, right? What are the chances? And I can identify children who might have even like the hyper chance of getting like insane progress measures from the age of 11 to 16. That's my really cynical point that I want to put out to you, which I've put out many times, but that's from a whole school point of view, right?
That's how we've ended up with our top performing schools in the country being so well funded, because the London Progress 8 effect is largely being driven by immigration, and we give those schools tons and tons of money for pupil premium, when they are actually in a pretty great situation in terms of their capacity to like have support from home and make sure kids make progress. Like it's one of the very tricky things about our education system at the moment. The regional inequalities in like funding to schools are so stark, and are so not related to like where the greatest needs are in the country, which are in urban regions outside London largely.
Guys, we've run out of time. Just what I'm going to do before we finish, I'm going to shout out to our sponsors again in a second, but I'm going to pose you our big question to finish off. Has teacher accountability gone too far? So have a think about that for a minute while I remind everybody about our amazing sponsors, Hachette Learning, who support all our shows at Teachers Talk Radio. Thanks very much, Hachette. And if you're interested in checking out their books, resources, world-class CPD stuff, then visit Hachette at Hachette Learning website and check out what they've got on offer. Loads of new titles. And also the Bet Show that I mentioned earlier, happening in January. Make sure you get your free teacher tickets for that. It's happening in January, Excel Centre, biggest EdTech event in the world. So check it out if you're interested in digital stuff as a teacher. Okay, Simon, has teacher accountability gone too far? I want a yes or no, followed by your reasoning.
Yes. I think when I came back to school during the COVID time, so I was training and then an early teacher then, I got a real sense coming back after the Easter holidays of how much schools are now the social safety net. And I think the accretion of expectation around what teachers are supposed to achieve with children in schools is way, way, way bigger than just teaching their subject.
Okay, thank you. Peter?
I'll say no, but the culture and context is absolutely crucial to the whole thing. It's about how it's done.
And Becky?
And I'm going to surprise you and say, actually, no. I think in the average school, I think that teacher accountability is okay, in the sense that I think there is an okay culture around target setting and performance management. There's acknowledgement the job is complex, that everybody is kind of trying. Most people are not in fear of their job. Largely, we're at a point where pay isn't linked to performance anymore. And so largely it feels like a relatively safe profession to work in. And for many professions, people don't get to feel that way.
I don't know, though. There's a
What
lot
do you
of
think, Tom?
To make it 2-2, I think it has gone too far, although I do acknowledge a lot of the points but the last bit, Becky, I'd probably disagree on, because I think a lot of teachers feel like they want to leave and quit because of just the sheer volume of stuff they have to do. And some of that is driven by that sort of scrutiny and accountability sort of culture. So I get a lot of what you said. And Peter, I get a lot of what you said. I am going to go, yes, it's gone too far. Not maybe to 10 out of 10, but I definitely think it's sort of in a lot of schools gone too far. And I think overall it's gone too far. There is my opinion. I have put it out there. We are 2-2. Guys, I think we need to do a part 2 on this. I think seriously, I think at some point, maybe in a few months or something, we need to. What do you think? It was great. We only touched the surface, though.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, Tom. I'm up for that.
I should have asked you afterwards. You'd have been like, "No, I can't." I ask you on screen. It's like, yeah, but no, seriously though, I think in a few months we got to go for that. But seriously, thank you so much, guys. Really, really good. Thank you, everybody who's tuned in. We had a few people making comments. Carl, the Boz Dag made a comment. Thank you for that. And sorry to anybody whose comments I didn't read out because we just didn't have time. But thank you for watching. We had nearly 500 viewers on the show so far. So thank you very much for checking it out. And we'll be back on TTR in about 7 minutes' time. So join Leanne, Lax, and Ray Whitehouse in 7 minutes for more stuff. So yeah, it'll be great. Cheers, everybody. And I will see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where